Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to speak here because there is an almost uncanny echo between the subject of the conference and the content of a novel I wrote recently. Very plainly, the novel is about an architect who gets fucked. Or whom the world has by the balls, to stay in your language. It all starts out very well. It's an architect at MIPEM. He gets the commission of his dreams. He is asked to design a new capital for a seceding, emerging African republic, only, of course, in the end to find himself the object of political machinations, intrigue, property speculation, and all the other wonderful things that surround our work. What I rarely speak about is that actually the novel is based on real events, and that the city in the novel is actually modeled on a real city, which has been built in Angola, announced in 2008 at the middle of the financial crisis to an enormous public acclaim in Angola, a city for 1 million homes, built according to, I guess, a fairly straightforward master plan designed by the contractor. No architect was ever involved. Masterminded by this guy who is a Frenchman with a very interesting past in Angola as an arms dealer, taking care of French interests at the time through arms deals, and who then later reinvented himself as a businessman who primarily brokered deals between the Chinese and the Africans, in which oil would flow in the direction of China and construction labor would flow in the direction of Africa. So anyway, the city was promoted. This is part of a promotional video, Sino-Angolan Partnership at Work. The video spares no effort to labor in a way the Chinese-African friendship. It shows the personal involvement of President Dos Santos even in the design. This is a giant model of the city, and it or at least claimed to do a lot of good things for the country. Enormous educational facilities, taking care of the elderly, building a city without barriers, a city with modern conveniences. I think something is wrong here, but very quickly and very tragically, the city quickly proved to be a mismatch, where apartments needed to be sold for between $120,000 or $200,000, while we all know that the average Angolan lives on less than $2 a day. So shortly after its completion, the city became a ghost town, was exposed as such with great delight by the Western media, who saw this, of course, as a Chinese-African fuck-up, who also simply claimed that in the video, the people, the school children were actors, and who then sent endless and endless and endless footage of a beautiful, pristine new city that largely stood empty. And the only habitation were shanty towns on the periphery of the city of people who couldn't afford to live there, while the buildings behind stood empty. And strangely and tragically, I think, Quilamba became a metaphor for Angola at large. This is the capital city of Angola, Luanda. Angola is one of the poorest nations on earth. Nevertheless, Luanda is the most expensive city in the world, which is a very, very curious contrast, of course. For those who think that these type of mismatches and these type of real estate mishaps are an inclusively Chinese or African affair, they are wrong. This is a phenomenon that meanwhile exists all over the world. Since the financial crisis of 2008, which originated in the United States, we have seen vast empty suburbs in Florida, in California, but also in Ireland, in the UK, and even, of course, Spain has its fair share of it. Francisco Hernando, I think it's the south of Madrid, the Ciudad Valdeluz, I think it's to the northeast. I'm very happy that all these examples in Madrid. Okay, well, but not too close, I guess. Okay. Uh, Partly finished and with a streetscape that is also pristine, very carefully manicured. It lacks buildings, and it allows, in a way, the nameplate of the city to become the most eloquent architectural expression on the site. What is the reason for this, you may wonder? We live in times where almost every nation, civilized nation, suffers a massive housing shortage, and at the same time we have enormous ghost towns. We have phantom cities with empty apartments, and we have homeless people, and they exist in tandem. And I think the only explanation ultimately is an economic one. If I speak for too long, you have to cut me off. This is a French economist, Thomas Piketty. He's wrote an 800-page book, of which the premise is exceedingly simple. He compares two ways of making money. One is the return on labor, the other one is the return on capital. In simple terms, how much money do you make from having money, and how much money do you make from working for your money? And as soon as you make more money from having money than you do from somebody who works can never catch up with somebody who already has money, and inequality inevitably increases no matter how hard people work. And this is more or less since the fall of the Berlin Wall, since globalization, this is the case in the world. The global return on capital is exceeding once again the global return on labor, as it did in the 19th century. So the curious thing is that in the context of this, buildings play an enormous role. Real estate, as it is called, residential real estate in particular, is the largest economic asset class in the world. More than gold, more than oil, more than all cryptocurrencies combined. It is our labor, it is the fruits of our labor that perpetuate this, whether we are aware of it or not. Buildings cost money. We're generally very good in making sure they cost very little, but they make money. And by the time they make money, we have moved on to making cost cuts on new buildings. But this is a very real thing. A simple example, this is the Gherkin, 2004. It tripled in value to $1 billion at the moment, simply because it was sold on 2 occasions. That's it. It's worth 3 times as much as it cost today. Our cities, in a way, are affected by this very much. In Amsterdam, my hometown, 10% of all purchases are not made by people who want to live there. They're made by foreign investors, assuming they can sell it for more than they buy it for. 15% of that happens in Vienna. 25% of Australian cities are bought by foreign investors. 30% of condos in Manhattan are bought by foreign investors. 1/3 of Vancouver's real estate is owned by Chinese buyers, many of whom don't even live there. And of course, the money invested, real estate, more than subject for people looking for a home, is the subject of money looking for a home in the current economic climate. And some of that money is dirty. A lot of that money is dirty, as we've seen recently in London, of course, in the wake of the Ukrainian conflict. It happens to the best of architects. This is a project of us in Holland Green. And this is a resident, which we recently found out lived there because she appeared in the Financial Times. This is the stepdaughter of Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. And so this was, I think, the most mainstream publicity we had for our architectural project to date. Thanks to that. All of this drives up prices. This is Nick Candy and a project called Hyde Park 1 at the edge of Hyde Park. He bought it for £60 million. And the interesting thing is he bought it from himself. One of his companies sold it to another company to set the standard that all ensuing buyers would have to pay from then. This is the record so far. Michael Dell, who owns the penthouse for $100 million in Raphael Vignoli's Park Avenue tower. And that tower is an interesting project. It looks like the residents are taking part in a kind of light festival, a sort of choreographed light artwork where every 14 floors they switch on the lights. But that's not the case, because every 14th floor you have a plant room, and that's actually the only space lit, because the vast majority of the spaces are empty. And they're not empty because they're not sold. All of them are sold. They're empty simply because they're bought, owned, and not lived in. A Qatari businessman buying an apartment for $14 million, largely to serve as a furniture showroom. This is Jennifer Lopez and Alex Rodriguez buying an apartment for $15 million. This is their love nest, but it doesn't look like a lot of love is happening there. And this is and again, sold for more money than bought. A Saudi real magnate buying a penthouse for $87. It looks like he has the same interior designer as the Qatari businessman, and he sold it in a few years for more than double of what he bought it for, while never setting a foot inside the thing. So this is essentially a stacking of a lot of furniture showrooms, where people preferably don't have neighbors, so the tower becomes very thin. And they become thinner and thinner. The combination between capital, absence, and not wanting neighbors leads to ever more constructive masteries. This is the shop tower. And if you extrapolate this trend, so a building, an even thinner building, but if nobody lives there anyway, you may as well build concrete sculptures or even a life-size Brancusi. And actually, Midtown Manhattan is beginning to look like a set of concrete sculptures, where concrete is essentially the equivalent, the 21st century equivalent of gold as a counterbalance to capital before. Anyway, many of the cities I spoke about are counted amongst the most livable cities in the world. Livable cities are rich cities. But more than rich cities, livable cities are expensive cities. These are the prices in euros per square meters of residential space that you pay in each city. Now you can do some interesting mathematics on this. Let's say you can go to the bank, you get a mortgage, generally 2.5 times your annual salary. That's what the bank will lend you. So if we apply that to these cities, 2.5 times the median salary, average price per square meters, there's an interesting list emerging of how many square meters you can buy in each of these cities if you have a median income. The most livable city in the world allows you an apartment of 15 square meters. 15 square meters is 3 by 5 meters. This is the size of a human body. 15 square meters is slightly bigger than a maximum security prison cell. It's slightly bigger than a Jayco caravan. It's slightly bigger than a car park, but it's still smaller than what the early constructivists defined as the existence minimum at the outset of the 20th century. It's about the size of a container. And containers we see quite a lot in the city as a form of modern construction. But speaking about modernity, I think the 21st century has witnessed a form of trading down when it comes to
un intercambio a la baja en lo que respecta a la modernidad. Si volvemos a la fundación del Bauhaus, que nos conformamos con el mismo estilo, pero más pequeño. Los salarios se han incrementado y las hipotecas y los préstamos también, pero no a la misma velocidad ni de lejos que el precio de la vivienda, con resultados muy predecibles. Aquí vemos Barcelona, pero ha pasado lo mismo en Estados Unidos, en Italia y en Berlín. Ahora es una fuente universal de descontento. Le Corbusier escribió Arquitectura o Revolución, y parece que la mayor parte de lo que vemos está al borde de la revolución. Y podemos preguntarnos, ¿qué puede hacer la arquitectura? ¿Qué pueden hacer los arquitectos? Pues pueden hacerse militantes, unirse a la revolución. Pero me pregunto si hay algo que podemos hacer dentro de nuestra profesión para dejar de contribuir a esta tendencia. Y para ello creo que es necesario revisitar nuestros instintos más primordiales. Estos son los principios de Vitruvio: fuerza, funcionalidad y belleza. Pero, siendo sinceros, cuanto antes se completa un edificio, antes se queda obsoleto, ¿no? La vida del edificio es cada vez más corta. Y tal vez en el futuro el proyecto vital de los edificios se convierta en negativo. Es decir, que como arquitectos tendremos que planear la demolición de nuestro edificio antes incluso de su construcción, que desde un punto de vista de sostenibilidad será algo muy saludable. Esencialmente lo que significa es que esta tríada se sustituye por brevitas, flexibilitas, humilitas.
I think that the relation to Spanish is close
Creo
enough
que
for the
se
slide
parece
to
lo
be
bastante
self-evident.
al castellano como
And
para que
that could mean
sea
that from
evidente
relishing
su
the
significado.
Parthenon,
Y
we may
evidentemente
have
de
to
pasar
relish
de
a
admirar
different
el
type of
Partenón,
building. This is
pues vamos a
by
empezar a
example,
admirar otro tipo de
a gasoline
edificios.
station turned into a cinema. And the nice thing about this building is that it is not meant to last. It is specifically used for what it was not designed for, and you can change it into almost anything else. The nice thing about a building like this is also that inmobiliaria, the Spanish term for real estate, that which doesn't move, that which is fixed, could then be replaced by the notion of mobiliaria, that which can move, that which is changeable. And mobiliaria, typically, are subject to a very different economic logic than the gherkin, for instance. They are subject to an inverse economic logic, where buildings, just like computers, like cars, or like any other consumer commodity, could depreciate in value. You can buy secondhand for less, and would give starters a chance once again. And the most beautiful thing of this change is that without class struggle, you could get rid of an entirely horrible class of people. You don't have to kill them. We just have to do our job a little bit different for these people to disappear. And that, in short, is my master plan.